The one thing my son can do on his own without any help from his parents is breathe. To have medical professionals make the judgment that Matthew does not need any medical services, it's outrageous. It's just unthinkable.
Who should take care of our nation's sick? And what happens when an entire public health program gets handed over to private companies?
The privatization of Medicaid has really hurt people who most rely on that program. And it's very heart-wrenching for me.
They're focused on money, and we're focused on the health of our son.
Welcome to Iowa, a state that recently privatized Medicaid, handing control of the entire public health program to for-profit companies.
Iowa's Medicaid system is beginning to collapse, and it's collapsing under the weight of greed.
It raises serious questions about our own humanity.
Hey guys, I'm Kate, and this Sunday we're in Iowa to put a face to the people who rely on Medicaid and find out what happens when a state puts a crucial social safety net in the hands of for-profit companies. Before we get into it, remember, Medicaid's that federal program established back in 1965 that gives health insurance to our country's poor, elderly, and disabled population. It's objectively been a saving grace for millions of Americans. In Iowa, about 600,000 people are on it, or about 1 out of every 5 people in the state. One of those people receiving Medicaid is Matthew Hudson, who had a tragic brain bleed which left him completely paralyzed when he was 16. He's now profoundly disabled, and his parents take care of him.
We have to feed him all his meals. We bathe him. We have to clothe him. We do all his toileting.
Since the injury 14 years ago, Dave Hudson and his wife have used the Medicaid money to treat Matthew at their home. This way, he doesn't have to go to an institution, which Dave thinks would be more expensive and impersonal.
I think I made the decision that Matthew deserved to live the best life possible. I'm okay of putting my life aside so that he can have the best possible life.
And that's how it was for the Hudsons for more than a decade. But then in 2016, the governor of Iowa at the time, without any legislative input, transferred every Iowa Medicaid patient onto plans run by managed care organizations, or what you'll hear referred to as MCOs. The governor said having these for-profit companies handle the state's $5 billion Medicaid program would save taxpayers money and ultimately would lead to better care. But a few months later, the Hudsons got a letter from their new MCO announcing they were cutting all of Matthew's care.
Right here. The reason for the decision is that the information reviewed fails to establish medical necessity for the requested service. When I read that, I couldn't believe it. You can't be a medical professional and tell me that my son does not need any medical services.
What message are these companies sending?
Well, I think the message primarily is we don't care enough about Matt to pay for the services he needs. If we're going to make any money in Iowa, then people like your son who are expensive and chronically ill is going to be a drain on our profits for as long as he's alive.
Dave eventually fought the cuts and won, but his struggle isn't unique. After the state handed Medicaid over to the health companies, there have been hundreds of stories of Iowans suddenly being denied crucial coverage and then getting stuck in an endless cycle of appeals to get it back.
Every single week, I get calls from people saying I was denied service of this or that nature. It's overwhelming as a reporter.
That's Jason Clayworth. He's an investigative reporter at the Des Moines Register and has written dozens of stories about the fallout of Medicaid privatization. One woman even claims that the privatization led to her husband's death.
His wife is convinced that had he been receiving the same care that he had received for decades, that her husband would still be alive. These are people that many times they can't literally speak for themselves. Many of these folks are children. They don't understand their rights. For many of these people, it is a matter of life and death. These are serious, serious issues.
But here's the thing, Iowa's not the only place where this is happening. In fact, you probably live in a state that's privatized Medicaid too. Since the 1980s, 39 states have done so in order to save a buck. And then what do critics say happens next?
When you get into profit motive, well, that's your first goal, is to turn a profit. And if it means you turn a profit at the expense of other people, you do it.
And by the way, privatization hasn't just meant that patients are worse off, it's been a crisis for service providers too. Places like nursing homes and dental clinics and rehab centers. Many service providers say they aren't getting reimbursed from the MCOs, which means they have to cut back on staff and services.
I've had medical doctors who have called me, who have actually said, up until this point, I always felt it was part of my duty as a doctor to take Medicaid and to serve them. But I am to the point with frustration with the managed care organizations where I am on the edge and ready to just stop taking Medicaid altogether. When that happens, families are left with no one to go to for their child's medical care.
Give it back to the state. They didn't have problems when the state took care of it.
That's Joanne Facenda. Her son, Louis, is a 26-year-old with cerebral palsy. Joanne told me that a few months after Louis' Medicaid was moved to an MCO, all his care was cut, including his medication.
It was a nightmare. It was literally a nightmare. And what am I going to do? I can't afford all that medication.
Also cut were his daily nurse visits. So for 6 weeks, Louis went without the in-home bathing and diaper changing he had had for years.
He wasn't getting changed like he would normally get changed 2 or 3 times or more a day. He was in a dirty brief from like in the morning till 7 o'clock at night.
And all this just because some company decided that he didn't need these services.
It wasn't just the services, it was the mental part of his state of mind, not understanding why all this was happening. And I would cry for him because I felt so bad.
At this point, you're probably wondering how these private companies have responded to these horrible stories. Well, listen to how one doctor at one of the MCOs justified denying diaper changing services.
People have bowel movements every day where they don't completely clean themselves, and we don't fuss over too much. People are allowed to be dirty. You know, I would allow him to be a little dirty for a couple days.
What would you say to him if he was here?
I would spit in his face, to be honest. Yeah, right, Louis? You like to be clean. I think it's horrible. I don't have words for that.
I reached out to several people for this video, including the current Republican governor and the health companies. No one agreed to speak with me on camera. They also didn't respond to written questions in an email either, but I did get template statements back extolling the virtues of managed care. I also tried to reach out to Iowa Medicaid Director Mike Randall, and by the way, he's the same guy responsible for a similar privatization fiasco in Kansas, which the federal government recently denounced as being, quote, substantively out of compliance with U.S. law. Randall explicitly avoided me at a public meeting, but his press department told me in an email, quote, the department is committed to improving quality and access to care, promoting accountability for patient outcomes, and creating a more predictable and sustainable Medicaid budget. They also referred me to a study that ranks Iowa's healthcare system second in the nation for patient satisfaction, but Jason told me that study is dubious.
They will cite surveys that they can't provide the specific questions that were asked or the number of recipients that they asked the question to.
So for all we know, they asked 7 people.
We don't know.
Yeah.
No politician will say that they are out to harm the elderly or the poor, but their actions speak louder than words.
And what about this idea that the state will eventually save money? Well, in Iowa, the estimates of savings have varied wildly without much explanation. And a national report on privatized Medicaid showed that, yes, some states with managed care did save some money, but that, quote, the weight of the evidence suggests any potential savings will not be significant. And people like Dave Hudson say, even if money is being saved, on the backs of who?
It doesn't bother me if the number is $1 or $200 million. That doesn't bother me. What concerns me is, well, where did the savings come from? What had to be reduced in order for the state to save $141 million? My supposition is that the savings came from considerable reductions in Medicaid services.
Everyone should care about Medicaid because every one of us is an illness or an accident away from needing it someday. None of us know what our future holds. But what I do know is that if that happens to you, that you have a safety net in place called Medicaid. My experience with Medicaid in Iowa has only reinforced my belief that our nation needs to move toward a single-payer universal system.
I'm not certain that my son is safe with a Republican governor and a Republican legislature. The MCOs, and I say that as a lifelong Republican, they're focused on money, and we're focused on the health of our son.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching Because Facts. Remember to like, share, and follow for more videos like this on wonky and complicated subjects. And I wanted to give a shout out to the Des Moines Register, which has done some amazing coverage on this issue and really helped us understand it. So check out a link to their coverage in the comments below, and we'll see you next week.